Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. I'm Rebecca Friedman, the founding director of the Wolfsonian Public Humanities Lab at Florida International University. And I am so proud and honored to welcome all of you today to season 5 of our Copy and Conversations Miami Book Fair. Today is episode 4, and we have such an important conversation waiting for us. I cannot wait to hear. We will learn about author Paula Stone Williams' book, As a Woman, What I Learned About Power, Sex, and Patriarchy After I Transitioned. The series began at about a year and a half ago now, in the middle of the pandemic, when pivot was everybody's favorite word. We started Coffee and Conversations as a way of strengthening community ties and supporting all of our partners around us. We've explored a host of topics, including collaborating with the book fair last year. We've also explored histories of anti-Blackness in museum spaces and how the pandemic affected cultural institutions. So please visit our YouTube channel to watch past episodes. Now with this season, we're again working with the Miami Book Fair by highlighting a number of book fair authors, like our author today, to provide a kind of teaser for the fair itself, which is just around the corner. So today, as I said, we talk with Paula Stone Williams about her book, As a Woman, What I Learned About Power, Sex, and Patriarchy After I Transitioned. And we are honored to have it moderated, our talk today moderated by Jessie Fraga. Briefly, our format is simple and lasts about 30 minutes. And at the end, we will take questions from the audience. So please use that Q&A button at the bottom of your screen at any time. So without wasting any more time, allow me to introduce our moderator and our Miami Book Fair author. Jessie Fraga is a current FIU student, double majoring in journalism and women's and gender studies with a focus on queer studies. Jessie is a talented photographer and the new director for Panther Now, who has covered important stories from around the FIU community, like FIU's COVID-19 response and Florida legislation that impacts students' daily lives. Jessie has also been heavily involved in the FIU Pride Student Union Formation Committee since 2019 and was a crucial figure in the creating of FIU's first ever Pride Student Union. Jessie is an activist and a leading figure in the LGBTQIA+ community at FIU and the Miami community, striving to create inclusive spaces where all students and community members feel welcome. And our author today, Dr. Paula Stone Williams, is internationally known speaker on gender equity, LGBTQ advocacy, and religious tolerance. She's also a pastor and pastoral counselor in Boulder County, Colorado. Paula has been featured in the New York Times, TED Women, TED Summit, TEDx Mile High, Red Table Talk, the Denver Post, New York Post, New Scientist Magazine, Radio New Zealand, and many, many other media outlets. Her TED Talks have had more than 5 million views. It is our great honor and pleasure to welcome you both here today for this discussion. So I thank you so much. And without further ado, please, Jessie, the floor is yours.
Thank you. That was a great introduction. Hi, Paula.
Hi.
Hi, I'm so excited to talk about your book. And literally, I could not put the book down the entire time while reading it. I learned so much about the perspective of a woman, especially with like such pressure from the church. And as a trans man myself, I also grew up in the church, and it's definitely like such a huge impact on my identity, and I'm sure yours as well. So I could relate on so many levels to the stories that you talked about. Just to hop right into it, in the beginning of the book, when your friend Carol brought up your gender, and she basically was the one who made you like start questioning it, could you describe that social or political era that you were in during that time, and I guess how societal pressures played a part in the beginning of your transition?
Well, I think all of it you have to understand within the context of being a privileged white male. That was, in fact, my life. I think that even was my life as a child. You know, I knew from the time I was 3 or 4 that I was transgender. And in my naivete, I thought I got to choose. But also, I think in my entitlement, I got to choose. I thought, well, certainly I get to do pretty much anything else I want. So I probably also ought to be able to choose my gender. So I was really quite comfortable in the evangelical community, even though my own theology had moved way, way, way to the left, probably in the early 1980s. I mean, even before I finished my first master's degree. But I was very comfortable in that world. And I was well compensated in that world, had a lot of power in that world. And I thought, oh, I can change things from the inside. And, I look back on that now, and how much really can we change from the inside? Change pretty much always comes externally. I think when the day is done, yes, I thought I could bring about change from the inside, but I think mostly I was just comfortable and I did not want to give up that comfort. I also, as the years went by, knew more and more that I was moving in the direction of not being able to survive living as a man. But I knew it would be devastating to my wife and to my 3 children. So I was really quite convinced that I needed to remain living as a male. And when I was in New Hampshire that weekend with David and Carol, David's been my best friend for 30 years. When she said all that, I realized I had to get really serious about losing my privilege, about losing my comfort. We as a species kind of have this sense, certainly for the last 500 years, since the time of the modern age and Descartes and Francis Bacon and Isaac Newton, that we are primarily a rational species, that we are a truth-oriented species, that we focus on the truth, that we make our decisions based on the truth. But the truth is that as a species, we have always valued belonging more than we have valued standing with the truth. So when the tribe you're a part of is opposed to your very identity, to leave that tribe, to leave that community, means you're going to lose your sense of belonging. I'm a psychotherapist by trade. That's where my doctorate is in. And one of the basic fears of humans is being overwhelmed. The second is being abandoned. And when you lose your community, you're going to be both overwhelmed and abandoned. And that is, in fact, what happened to me. So it was a sobering moment to realize that I was, in fact, called, which I don't see as a theological term necessarily, that I was called to transition and the kind of loss it was going to bring about. I mean, it was a few years before I acted on it, but then I think it's pretty much always a few years before we respond to what Joseph Campbell called the hero's journey.
Right. Yeah. And on the topic of privilege, one quote from your book that I thought was beautiful. You said, "No one is ready for the trauma of transitioning genders. No white man is prepared for the loss of privilege." I myself refer to transitioning as some sort of trauma as well, whether people want to explain it as that or not. So can you describe that privilege and what that was like for you and the moment when you realized that it was being taken away?
My very first time I flew as a man, I was flying from Denver to Charlotte, and I got on the plane and there was stuff in my seat, and I picked up the stuff and put my stuff down. And the guy said, "That's my seat." I said, "Okay." Or, "That's my stuff." I said, "Okay, but it's in my seat. So I'll hold it for you till you find your seat." And he said, "Lady, that is my seat." I said, "Actually, it's not. It's my seat 1D, but like I said, I'll be happy to hold your stuff till you find your seat." And one more time, he said, "I don't know what I need to tell you. That is my seat." I said, "Yeah, actually, it's not. It's my seat." And the guy behind me at this point says, "Lady, would you take your effing argument elsewhere so I can get in the plane?" I was utterly and absolutely stunned. I had never been treated like that as a man. I can tell you exactly what would have happened. I would have said, "Excuse me, I believe that's my seat." And immediately the guy would have looked at his boarding pass and said, "Oh, I'm sorry. I know that because it happened all the time. I've flown 2.5 million miles with American Airlines. Cannot tell you the number of times that happened. No one ever questioned if I knew what I was talking about." So the flight attendant finally took our boarding passes, said to the guy, you're in 1C, she's in 1D. "No, I'm sorry, from in row nothing." I put his stuff down in 1C. "Mister, would you take your effing argument elsewhere?" Is seated next to me in 1F. And my friend Karen, who works for American, came on to the plane to give the paperwork to the captain. She waved as she left. I got to Charlotte, she called me. She said, "Paula, what happened? You were as white as a sheet." And I told her, and she said, oh yeah, welcome to the world of women." Now, I recognize that I will not live long enough to lose my male privilege. I brought most of it with me when I transitioned. I certainly brought my white privilege with me. But I don't think I was prepared to see how much the world is tilted in the favor of men. And it's true. I mean, it was true in a meeting I was in last night. There's not a week goes by that I don't see how that loss of privilege plays out in a very real and tangible way in my life.
Definitely. And to continue with that, you said, I did not realize a girl is given invisibility almost as a birthright, as my friend Carla puts it. It begins outside and moves inside, internalized for life, unless an extraordinary, empowering grace intervenes. Can you describe like what that extraordinary, empowering grace was for you, and how did it intervene in your life?
I don't know that I would say that I felt that as a trans woman. And when I say that, first of all, I recognize as a trans woman, I am in fact one transgender person. I can't speak for anybody else. I can only speak for my experience. I believe that I've made my way as a woman primarily because of the entitlement I brought with me as a man. And so I have just learned that you have to work a lot harder as a woman, that you need to be willing to be called nasty words, because while ambition is welcomed for a man, it's not for a woman. While I've never had any issues having an alpha personality as a male, I certainly have lots of issues having an alpha personality as a female. For me, I think it was just a matter of recognizing that I was going to have to be me, which included being willing to be ambitious and being willing to want to make a difference. Now that I live and have my being as a woman, there is nothing that satisfies me anymore than being that person to empower other women. I love it because most of what I speak on has nothing to do with trans issues. It has most everything to do with gender equity. I'm invited into the room because I happen to have experienced life in both genders. But what I'm talking about is gender inequity. And my first TED Talks had over 4.3 million views. I've heard from women in all 7 continents thanking me for validating their experience. There's no way that a cis woman can understand how much the culture is tilted in a man's favor. And there's no way a man can understand that either until he loses that. So for me to be in that kind of a position to speak in universities, conferences, corporations all the time, I did it yesterday, I did the day before, and be able to say to the women, you've got this, to say to the women, own what you know, to say to the guys, learn the value of deference. It's not a weakness, it's a respected male trait. You know, for me, it is wonderful to be in this unique position of being able to empower women. It is something I don't take lightly either. It's a responsibility I feel at the level of psychotherapist with my clients. It's something I feel at the level of my co-pastors at my church, 2 of whom are cis women. And it's certainly something I feel at the more macro level of the TED Talks I do, or my book, or any of the corporate or media speaking I do.
Yeah, definitely. And after coming out, when you did start a church of your own, what was it like to get back into that space, like as a person in power with so many eyes on you?
Well, it was very different. I routinely spoke in some of the largest churches in the nation when I was a man, so it wouldn't be unusual for me to speak to 20,000 people in a weekend. And now we have a new young church that has about 100 people. And so it's a much, much different experience. Most people are surprised that I'm still in the church. I was completely and utterly rejected by the evangelical church. I was a national leader. I probably knew 5,000, 6,000 people by name. And to date, I've had substantive conversations with exactly 3 of those 5,000 or 6,000 people. On the other hand, among my non-Christian friends, I've lost not one single friendship. So you can make of that what you will. There's no doubt that the evangelical Christian community is very much in opposition to the trans community right now. And I don't take it personally, but I think it's important for us to speak truth to it. I also believe that we are, as a species, hardwired to work out the meaning of life in community. And there are very few places in our world where we actually get together to work out the meaning of life. Educational institutions exist to bring knowledge. Government exists to help the citizenry. Corporations exist for profits for the shareholders. The only place I know that exists to teach us how to be human together and to search for meaning for life, Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning, is in fact religious communities. So I'm very much a fan of the power of religion for good. Unfortunately, right now we see, particularly through the media, an equally great power of religion for evil.
Yeah, definitely. And with religion and spirituality being such a huge part of your identity and who you are as a person, growing up in your book, you talked about how you would suppress your identity, and it took a while for you to come to this, as I'm sure, like myself, it was, and many other trans people, it's just hard to accept and understand like what's going on between your head and your body. You said in the book, nowhere is gender inequity more of a problem than in conservative religion. How did you get to that point of acceptance between yourself and what you believed in? And were you ever willing to give up what you believed in order to put your identity first?
Well, I did. I mean, that's exactly what I did. I lost every one of my jobs within 7 days, and I'd never had a bad review. I lost pretty much every friend I'd ever had in that world. So yeah, I put it all on the line and I lost it immediately. As I was saying before, I really felt for all the years I was there that I was bringing about change from within, because I did work hard for gender equity from the 1980s on. I worked hard for LGBTQ plus rights from that point on, but I did it from within that world, and it had limitations then that were upon me based on that. And if I could do it again, I think I would have left earlier, because again, as I said, I think change comes better from without than it does from within. So in my case, there's no way I was going to be able to remain true to myself and remain in that world. It was also no doubt that if I did come out, I didn't even have to transition. I just came out and lost all of my jobs within 7 days. So that is the reality of that world. And today, that world is in fact a significant problem. If we take a look at all three of the desert religions began as religions of scarcity. The Abrahamic religions are all desert religions: Christianity, Judaism, Islam. And they began in the desert. And as you would expect, the attitude was there's not enough to go around, so we've got to take care of our own. And that's understandable. Unfortunately, as they have evolved in their fundamentalist form, all three remain religions of scarcity. All three, in their fundamentalist forms, create enemies that don't exist. And right now in the United States, there's no group doing more damage to the evangelical or to trans children than the evangelical community. You know, for instance, you take a look at the 17 laws that have been passed recently in 7 states, the over now 200 laws pending in another 30 states. Who is driving those laws targeting the civil rights of transgender children? People assume it's Republican legislatures. That's true. But they also assume it's conservative Republicans. That's not true. A survey done not long ago indicates that 66% of conservative Republicans believe transgender people should have the same rights as everyone else. 61% of Trump voters in the 10 swing states, 61% of them believe that transgender people should have the same rights as everyone else. So where's the opposition coming from? Who's driving these laws? It's evangelical Christianity. 84% of evangelical Christians believe that gender is immutably determined at birth. 61% believe trans people already have too many legal rights. And yet only 25% of whom know someone who's out as a transgender person. I get paid a lot of dollars to speak at corporations, conferences, universities. But I go to Christian universities pro bono because I know that humans will change our minds on subjects, but not until the information comes to us in a non-threatening way. Mm. And the only way that happens is if they meet me and find out that I'm a relatively normal human being, just like they're a relatively normal human being. You know, we don't debate our way through these things. It's in hearing one another's narratives. That's why I wrote the book. If you read my story, you'll find out it's pretty darn similar to your story, whoever you are. It's the human story of any of us who believe in authenticity. And so I do take every opportunity I can to speak into that world, because that's really the only way we'll change their attitudes, is by speaking one person at a time.
Right. Yeah, definitely. And I think for me at least, like there's never been a time where I regretted coming out, and there's a lot of negative that comes with it, as I'm sure there was for you. But I think like from where you were to where you are now is just really inspiring. And I know in the book you said something about how like people look up to you and you're just like, I'm just another person. I see it, and it's really touching. And it's good to see that there are other trans people in the world that are really just like not even advocating for the trans community, but just advocating for equality in general, and like, you know, everybody just being equal, which is, that's how it should be.
I think so.
Yeah. So when you came out, and especially after such backlash at your church, was there any point that you regretted what you did, and maybe like you were like, damn, I wish I wouldn't have done that?
No, there was never a point of looking back. I was shocked that I was treated so horribly by the church. I knew that I would lose my jobs. I didn't know that I would be vilified, hated. I thought people would think, wow, we know Paul's character, so we probably don't understand enough about what it means to be transgender. I did not think they would think, oh, yeah, all transgender people are evil, so therefore we must have been wrong about Paul's character. That just floored me, that was the narrative that they opted to go with when these people had known me for decades. But I no, there was no looking back at all. I think I still feel days of sorrow for what my family has lost, for what my ex-wife lost, for what my children have lost, because I blew up the family narrative. I exploded the family narrative, and it's taken us years to create a new normal. So there's that, but it's not regret. It's mostly allowing the suffering of that and their suffering to be assimilated at my soul level. Most of us respond from an ego level. We don't actually let things sink below our ego level to the soul level. And we don't get wisdom from knowledge. Knowledge is knowledge. Wisdom only comes from assimilating suffering. And so I've gained a lot of wisdom from my own suffering, and I've watched my family gain a lot of wisdom from assimilating their own suffering. I still wish I hadn't had to do it to them. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. And same with my family. Like, I came out to them about 2 years ago, before I started testosterone and physically transitioning. And it's been a lot for them. Like, I've heard things like, oh, we lost our girl, like, where'd she go? Just it's crazy. But I agree in the sense that, yeah, I feel a little bit bad, but also like it's I guess the better side of me. And authenticity, as you were saying, is probably the most important thing that at least I learned from this book.
Yeah, I've said in all three of my TED Talks that have been online, every one of them I've worked in the line, the call toward authenticity is sacred and holy and for the greater good. It's the dedication line in the book as well. I truly believe it.
Me too. That's beautiful. And on a different note, so I'm 20 years old. Like I said, I started transitioning about 2 years ago. And yeah, I've been told it's disrespectful to bring up a woman's age, but like for me as a 20-year-old, when I see older trans people, it just like gives me a sense of hope, and like just shows me like there's a world out here besides like where I'm at right now. So how did you, when you came out, or currently, how did being trans and understanding your true self strengthen or hinder you?
Oh, I think always being true to yourself is essential. It's necessary. It's really what Joseph Campbell called the hero's journey. And all of us initially reject the hero's journey because it's always a call onto the road of trials, and nobody willingly goes onto the road of trials. You go onto the road of trials when you realize you have no option but to go onto the road of trials, when you recognize that you're called onto the road of trials. And for me, that didn't happen until much later in life. But once I knew I had experienced that strong call, I really knew I had no choice but to respond to that call. And if you look at the hero's journey, you see that an ordinary citizen is called onto an extraordinary journey onto the road of trials. And initially, they always reject that call. And then a spiritual guide comes into their life, a Yoda, if you will, that gives them the courage to answer that call. And then they find themselves on the road of trials, and then it gets worse. Always it gets worse. They find themselves in a deep, dark cave. It's what John of the Cross called the dark night of the soul. It's what Dante referred to at the beginning of the Divine Comedy when he said, "In the middle of the road of my life, I awoke in a dark wood where the true way was wholly lost." And I went through that dark period. I think anyone who answers the call into the hero's journey does. You're completely and utterly lost, but it's also when you realize that lost is a place too. And that it's all right to spend time. There are things you can learn in the place called lost. You simply cannot learn any other way. And eventually you do find the light at the end of the tunnel, and it's not an oncoming train this time. And you find yourself back under the ordinary road of trials, which now feels like nothing compared to the dark night of the soul you've been through. And I think that's what the journey has been like for me. Certainly there were times of utter, complete lostness. Certainly shortly after I transitioned, the first 48 months after I transitioned, I earned a total of $23,000. And it was just a very difficult time, but I have zero regrets about having been true to who I am, even though it is later in life.
Yeah. And I'm so happy that you ended up here. Like what you've accomplished since then started off, as you said, like in a dark tunnel, and now to see where you are now, it's really beautiful. And I see we're getting closer to 4:30. So to end off on a bright note, could you describe your most memorable euphoric moment where you truly felt like Paula?
I'm not sure there is any one moment that comes out to me. I think it's something that actually is ongoing. And I felt it yesterday in the middle of a meeting in which I was not being taken seriously for my knowledge. When someone finally said, "Well, why don't we ask Paula about that? She literally wrote the book on this subject." And I thought how fortunate I am that there are people who will speak up for me, and really how privileged I still am that there are people who want the world to know that there are things I can bring to the table. And so, yeah, it was a moment of deep satisfaction in just being true to the journey. Yeah.
That's amazing. And I'm so happy that I got to speak with you today. This was amazing. And I hope we can talk more in the future about everything that's going on in your life and your journey. Thank you so much for speaking with us. And I see Rebecca's back in here. So I don't know if she wants to do like an outro or.
Yeah. Thank you so much. What an incredibly powerful conversation to have witnessed. Thank you, both of you, for your work and for your openness. And I have chills quite sincerely. It was really amazing. I'm going to make sure every one of my children watches today's episode. Thank you. Thank you, both of you.
Thank you.
Make us proud, Jesse, at FIU. So thank you for being part of this today. And thank you everybody for listening those who are listening now and those who will be listening on our YouTube channel later. I appreciate that. And don't forget everyone to visit the Miami Book Fair, which it will be at the MDC Wolfson campus, downtown Miami. And Paula will be there too. So let's all come out and hear her powerful story and hear about her book yet again. Because Paula is just one of the many authors from around the world who are participating in Miami Book Fair 2021, the nation's largest gathering of writers and readers of all ages. they're looking forward, the authors are, to sharing their work, their thoughts, and their new ideas with everyone in person and online. So please visit miamibookfair.com, hashtag Miami Book Fair 2021. And everyone else, also please join us on Thursday as we continue our journey here with Coffee and Conversations. We get to speak with the book fair author, Rafia Zaharia, about her new book, Against White Feminism, Notes on Disruption. So more powerful conversations coming. And that one will be moderated by my colleague, Celine Leboeuf in the philosophy department. So thank you all. Thank you again, Paul and Jesse, and everyone have a wonderful afternoon. Take it
Thank
easy.
you. Yes, everybody go buy Paula's book.
100%.
Bye.
Have it already. Bye. Thank you.